Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our PatternFly demo. We're going to go ahead and jump right in here. I always like to point out at the top of our demo, you can see the link to our YouTube with other recordings, as well as the link to our forum, where we now regularly answer questions that you may have about PatternFly. So every sprint, we have one of our devs man the forum and answer questions. And if you have any questions PatternFly related, that can be a great place to start having those conversations. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with interaction design and our design docs progress. Stacey, will you kick us off?
Sure, yep. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So I have been working on, oh wait, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I've been working on text and data input design documentation, which overlaps a fair amount with some of the forms documentation, but essentially just kind of going through the different input types. So we have text input, the different data input types, and then bound data input. And I need to create images for this documentation still, but it will start with kind of listing out the different elements of text input and data inputs. And then it'll walk through how to use labels appropriately. It goes kind of in depth into top aligned labels versus left aligned, when to use, and then also how we recommend you indicate required fields, and then also labeling for checkboxes and radio buttons. And then it goes into text input guidelines, and this talks a lot about how we recommend using different help like info, tips, placeholder text, helper text, stuff like that. And then also how to manage errors for text input fields. And this is the section that kind of overlaps pretty directly with forms. So we have to decide whether we want to repeat those topics here and keep them in forms, or maybe pull them out of forms and just have them here. But that's a conversation I'll have with Matt when we go through the review process. And then data input, so this goes through the different types of data input components that we're providing, and then also talks through when you should use them. So using checkboxes versus radio items versus drop downs, and then versus toggles. And then we'll talk a little bit about bound data input elements like date pickers and time pickers. And that's it. And you can see this doc is linked out from the agenda. So if you want to take a look and provide feedback, you're more than welcome to. That's all.
Great, thank you, Stacey. Any questions? All right, we're going to move on to Gina with the colors page.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm going to share my screen. So I put although the colors page will be on the site, I put it in this column because I'm going to have to work on some more documentation for the chart color system that Michael worked on for a while.
Are you sharing yours?
Yeah, I am. And so the page itself, it's split into light background and dark background. And then from then on, I categorize the colors into theme colors. And each color swatch has the hex value number and the CSS variable that it is as well, which you can click on, and that will bring you to the variable page that we have on the site as well. And so that's all on the left column. And then on the right is the colors in context, which I imagine that the component example or whatever example that we decide to put on the right will be interactive so that you can see the colors in context and just how they play out when you interact with the component. Obviously, this is just a placeholder. And then as we continue, there's typography colors down here, that some examples of links within content. And if anybody has any other ideas of how to show the typography colors other than just like a paragraph of text, I'm very open to other ideas, and you can leave comments on the Envision project. And then finally the chart colors. So this is just our suggested palette of chart colors, I would say. And so it's formatted in a very similar way as what it is up there. But then, like I said, we're gonna need to designate individual page for charting in the color system itself. So I just put a link at the bottom saying if you want to learn more, you can go there, just because it would make the page way too long if we put it all in this one. And then lastly, I go over the contrast ratios with the AA compliance rules, and then just give an example of how we do it. Yeah. So then obviously there would be a very similar layout for dark background as well. And just, it wouldn't be for all, since we don't have colors for all of these, it just wouldn't be as long, but it would be the same layout. Yeah. That's all I got.
Great, thanks, Gina. And then moving over to visuals, did you want to cover card view demo as well?
Yeah. Sorry, I'll share my screen again. All right. I just did a demo of cards within a page layout, and this is what I came up with, and it was kind of similar based on what Kyle did for PF3 a while back. And I just did a layout of cards. Yeah, and that's all.
Hey, Gina, so let's talk later about the card view. I think there's probably something a little bit different that I was looking for, which is more of a card grid type of layout. So we can talk about that.
Yeah.
I'll send you an invite to talk this afternoon.
Okay.
And just to remind everyone to go ahead and mute. I think we have someone on the call who may not realize they're not muted. Thanks for doing that. All right, and we'll move on to CSS. Michael Spaxman with Modular Imports.
Hello. So yeah, modular import. What are we talking about here? So we've had these all along. It's just the notion that we break apart our styling offerings into individual modules that we can import. There was a bit of a problem that we've kind of ran into recently, and basically the issue is if you have an application that uses Patternfly or potentially other UI frameworks, and you wanted to integrate Patternfly 4 in an incremental fashion, the thing that we would recommend historically was to basically import a base Patternfly style sheet plus any additional component style sheets that you would need. And basically that by itself, it was doing too much. So the part of the base style sheet included resets for inheritable and non-inheritable properties, among other things. And this ultimately just it created problems in your application. The most notable one would be that, fonts you would see fonts affected. So if you just wanted to pull in one component in isolation and leave the rest of your app as it was, you kind of couldn't do that. It was also not the best solution because there was so there was a lot of things that came with Patternfly base, and there was a way to turn on and off certain parts of the base. It would require that you use a SAS preprocessor, and you would need to set variables like this, to basically turn on and off the various parts of base that you did or didn't want. There's limitations around what we can even make, conditional using this approach. So basically, we wanted to kind of simplify this whole process, and so what we ended up doing is basically just taking the approach that we already had a little bit further and just broke down even further these same style sheets so that you can just import individual things. So basically, instead of instead of importing the entire base and then having to undo certain parts of the base, you can just import the things you want. So I'll put this pull request in the chat so you can take a look. But in a nutshell, we've exposed these new style sheets for consumption. If you just want fonts, you can just pull in a fonts style sheet. If you just want font awesome icons, you can just pull that in. If you just want PatternFly icons, you can just pull that in. If you're starting with a new application and you don't have any other UI components laying around, there's a good chance you could probably just do what you've always done and just pull in the full PatternFly base, which will give you all these things. But if there's something that you don't want, something that's conflicting with your application, you can just omit it, from your includes, and that'll pretty much get you there. So in a nutshell, it's a matter of like do this, not this kind of thing. Another change that was part of this is there were some individual styling modules that you couldn't get in a CSS format. You had to use Sass, which a lot of applications just don't want to do or can't do for whatever reason. So everything that's exposed as a Sass module is now also exposed as a CSS module. So that should just give us more flexibility. It should ease the integration of PatternFly 4 into existing UIs, and generally just make it easier to work with. That's the crux of this change. And while we're on this subject, talking about the distribution, I wanted to just revisit something that we spoke about maybe a few weeks ago, while we were talking about the IE11, offering that we have. And basically, the last time we spoke, I mentioned that there were some new files. There was IE11- name of style sheet included, in all of the component directories for each component. And basically, we've done away with this. It's not that we've dropped support for IE11 in any way. We still have this conversion utils library that we put together. The reason we got rid of the IE11 style sheets from being included as part of the distribution was just for the fact that if you're going to run this conversion utility anyway, it basically just reconverts those same files, and you'd end up with the same result. So there was really no benefit to just using those files on their own. So I just wanted to mention that because I think we never I wanted to correct what I said, because we got rid of those a couple of days after the demo a few weeks ago. So I think that is it. I'll paste these in the chat so you guys can take a look. But yep, that's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. And Christy with bug fixes.
Hi guys. So I don't have any new components or enhancements to share this week, but I just wanted to show some of the bugs and small issues that I've been working on. So this is what we currently have for the compact table in PatternFly. And as you can see, we're getting these breaks where when there's too much content in the compact table, these table cells are centered and these checkboxes are aligned to the top. So it's breaking, and it's going to break because the compact table is so small. So the fix for that is that we spoke with design and we decided that table cells should be always vertically aligned to the top. And so I think this is a really solid fix for any bugs with overflows in the table. And so this applies to every table. You can see these are all aligned to the top now. Another bug is that these icons, which are centered on desktop, on mobile, they are still centered, and we want them to be aligned to the left. So we just created an icon class that you can apply to any icon that you use in a table, and it'll center it for you in the column on desktop, and then on mobile, it'll align it to the left. Next thing, the empty state. So currently in PatternFly, it has a max width of 600 pixels, which if it was to be applied inside of a parent, it wouldn't take up 100% of the width, which is what ideally we would want. So now we have the standard empty state, which takes up 100% width of its parent. And then you can add a small modifier to give it 300 pixels max width, or a large modifier to give it 600 pixels max width. So this makes it more flexible and easier for React to adopt. Next is an overflow bug that Michael Coker found in Firefox. So anytime you have content that overflows and scrolls, just like in the accordion here, the padding gets cut off. So this is in Firefox, and then this is in Chrome. So you can, I mean, it's kind of small, but you can kind of see that the padding gets cut off. And then we kind of explored options on the internet and like what fixes there are for it, and there's not many, but you can hack it and give it a pseudo element that adds height to the bottom, or you can give it a child element which has the padding. So we went with that one, and so now any component that has an overflow like this has a child element that contains the padding, and that fixes this issue. So it applies to accordion, data list, data table, page, and wizard. Next thing. So for tabs that scroll, we really, ideally, from a design perspective, want to get rid of this scroll bar. It adds 15 pixels of height to the tabs, which wasn't there before, and it kind of just clutters how tabs look, and it's not ideal. And so, as you probably know, scroll bars are really hard to like naturally hide in Firefox, but you can hide them in Chrome. And so one idea that fixes that is that the parent has an overflow hidden on the y-axis, but then the child has an overflow x that scrolls, and then a margin of negative 15 pixels, which hides the scroll bar. And so this is a good fix for now, but we still need to test it on all devices that have like a mouse or touch. And then we think it is okay because the scroll bar ideally shows that element scrolls, but in the tabs we have these arrows which also indicate scrolling, so we think it'll be okay, but we still need to do some testing. And then on the table, this bug we're getting on mobile, whenever there's two elements inside of a table cell, they're breaking like this, and that's because it needs a div wrapped around it to associate the two elements together. Otherwise this element pairs with this one, and then it pairs this with the space here. And so what we did to fix that is all of the TD and THs have a div wrapped inside of them that basically wraps any content inside of your table cell so that you avoid any breaks like that. So it should be pretty good now. And then the last thing is for the select component, currently all of these toggles were divs, and as they're interactive elements, it means they weren't getting focus. You can see here. The main reason for it being a div was that we have selects with like a type ahead, which we have a lot of interactive elements in it, and you can't have a button inside of a button. So that was the reason for that. But now, whenever you have a select with just a toggle, it becomes a button. And then when you have a type ahead, you can have the input, and then just this toggle arrow becomes the button. And so this takes on the ARIA attributes of the entire toggle instead. So now if you were to use your keyboard, the tab, that arrow will get focus. So yeah, that's about it from me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christy. Any questions from the group? All right. And Michael. This is Michael Coker.
Hello. Share my screen. Okay. So the first up is disabled drop-down groups. Previously, we didn't have a way to indicate that disabled either toggles or drop-downs were in a disabled state. And so we added this to both the default style drop-down as well as the plain style drop-down, where you would just have an icon that toggles your drop-down menu. Then the color indicator for the disabled state matches just our default disabled state that's also included in the button component. And then for a different variation of the drop-down menu, we call a split button, where you can have multiple actions inside of a single toggle. There's a disabled state for that as well. And then if you were interested in using it and had questions, that's included in the documentation down here. Up next is supporting groups inside of dropdowns. So previously in our dropdown component, we didn't have the concept of groups. It's just a single list of actions or links. You could potentially try to define your own group by using a divider or separator. But if you wanted a group with like section headings or something that was a little more meaningful than just having a divider or separator inside of your drop-down menu list, you can now define a group with or without a title that's an indicator as the title for the group. And you can see that in our drop-down examples, just a drop-down with groups example. And then last was in our SAS setup, we include Font Awesome 5 by default in the PatternFly SCSS. If you wanted to exclude that, we have SAS flags that you can set to true or false that allow you to include or exclude bits of the SCSS. So we now have a variable called pf global disable font awesome that you can set to true. That'll disable font awesome entirely from being bundled with PatternFly if you want to not use font awesome or use your own or whatever. That is set to false by default. So font awesome is included, and then we now have an additional variable called pf global enable font awesome cdn, also set to false by default, so that font awesome is packaged with PatternFly. But if you set this to true, then instead of including the local version of font awesome that we have in the distribution, we import the font awesome cdn links for the font awesome library instead. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Any questions here? All right, James is going to present progress bar updates.
Hi, so sharing my screen. The change that I made was the progress bar update feature for ARIA. So we have here progress bar example updates. Text needs to be changed, and the percentage needed to be changed from numbers to actual text so that when a screen reader, it actually calls out what it is. So I added two components to the progress bar component. So there's a progress finite stop. It calls out 2 of 5. And then the next one is the progress step instructions. Say if there's an instruction that tells you to do something specific, or it tells you that what it is that's doing something specific. Step 2, copying files. Generally, we would just have normal percentages without any further detail. So those were the enhancements that we made for the progress bar on PatternFly. That's it for me.
Thanks, James. And next, moving on to our website work. Our PatternFly 4 website is in progress here. Stacy is going to go over our CSS variable content strategy.
Yeah, I thought this might be interesting for some folks, and hopefully if you guys have feedback, I'd love it. So we're starting to try to figure out how we're going to introduce our CSS variables on the website to both developers and designers. So put together this content strategy, and you can take a look. This is also linked from the agenda. Essentially, like how and where we're going to surface information about the CSS variables, since it's important for both developers and designers to understand. So as designers are creating specs for devs, they understand what the CSS variables are and how they can utilize them in their specifications so that we're making the most of the variable system. So we're going to introduce it in our getting started content, so in the overview section and also in the design and develop pages. And you can take a look. I've linked to the copy doc here to show like exactly what we're thinking about saying. And then Joachim's going to show our CSS global variables grid. So we're going to have essentially a grid that just surfaces all of our global CSS variables, and then we'll also surface the component level CSS variables in the component documentation. And then on the styles pages, we're going to be linking to the global CSS variables to give developers or designers and developers this linkage. So our styles are defined and enforced by our CSS variables, and just kind of making sure that everybody understands that. And then finally, what we'd also like to do is create a series of 3 videos to kind of onboard designers and developers to just really show, because I do think that video content will say so much more than we can ever say in writing, kind of show how a designer would use the variable system from beginning to end with the sketch kit and also Zeppelin, and then an example of a developer kind of utilizing the variable system to make modifications, and then also how you can use the system to create your own components. So that's the strategy. If you guys have feelings about better ways that we can surface this content and explain it to developers and to designers, I would love to hear it. So check out this content strategy, check out the copy doc, and then, yeah, just let me know if you have any suggestions or anything that you think that we're missing. That's all.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stacy. Okay, and Joachim's going to share more about the site work and how we're building it out.
Yeah. All right, can you see? Okay, so first things for the website, there were a couple structural changes and build changes. So right now the content directory has been moved up from within the source directory outside, right on the PatternFly 4. Also, it's now co-locating both MD. So lots of markdown files that get pulled into the website, but also we can write MDX files down plus JSX capabilities, so that can still be edited by editors, but also you can start to add React components to that, which basically allow you to configure the. So this is the main navigation.
Hey, Joachim, we lost your audio.
Oh, can you not hear me anymore?
We can hear you now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I think I have to hold this up. Okay. Anyways, you can configure the site navigation and main navigation at the top now through these JSON files. So that was the first change. Next, to support the CSS variables that Stacy was just talking about, I went through the React and core repositories and basically added an additional field called variables root to the various components and layouts that we have. And also in core, I noticed that some heading texts were missing. So I added those where needed. And in order to make that less of an, to make that better in the future, I also added some props validation in core so that the heading text is required now. So yeah, this is for core, and then these are the changes for React in order to support global and local CSS variables. And what this ends up looking like is, actually I need to pull this up, me too. So we've got our global CSS variables grid right here. You can see it shows all of the global variables, and you can also search them. It searches across any of the 3 columns. So for example, if I'm looking for just the variables that have a color set to white, I can just search for that. These are the global variables. And then for each of the components, for example, if I look at alert, at the bottom, we also show the CSS variables relevant to that component. So I guess, given this information, if you were to pull this in as a consumer, but I guess you wanted to do some modifications to it, for example, changing the alert title from a 1 rem font size to 2 rem, that would be very easy now, given this information. These local variables are visible across both the HTML components and the React components. So you would see the same variables at the bottom here. And these changes have been backported also to the workspace documentation. So if we go to PatternFly React.search, you can see that global variables has also been updated to use our new table grid. And also each component again has, where applicable, has the local variables. And since I'm here in the local workspace documentation, you'll also see that the sitemap just changed a little bit. It was getting a little bit annoying scrolling through a big list because all the props are being shown. So I just added this button up here that lets you expand all of the components and also collapse them just to make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, back to React. The next change is that now we're generating TypeScript property information. So before we were getting all the props for our JavaScript written, components written in JavaScript, but we couldn't get those same props in TypeScript. But I added a tool called TypeDoc, which basically parses the TypeScript files and spits out a JSON file. This JSON file is then further transformed into a GraphQL so that we can query that in our React docs package. So this ends up, if we go, for example, to avatar, which is one of our first components to be written in TypeScript, you can see that now we get the props. So going forward, I think we should be able to convert existing JavaScript components to TypeScript and also write new TypeScript components. And this is going to, we've had a lot of issues in PatternFly React with TypeScript definitions, so this should really reduce these types of errors. And I think that was it. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jakob. And that is the end of our demo for today. Are there any questions for the group? All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time, and I'll be posting this video on our YouTube channel. I'll talk to you later. Thanks so much.